Hello, and today we're going to be reviewing the Ryobi PCL665B 18-volt flexible LED clamp light. So let's go ahead and get started. Okay, starting off at the bottom of the tool, we have the battery slot, which will accept any of Ryobi's 18-volt batteries. Overall, the battery slot is, well, completely functional. I don't really have any complaints. The batteries fit in nice and securely with very little looseness or play, and the contacts seem to line up just right, so no problems there either. I haven't had it drop any batteries, so no complaints there also. So, at the end of the day, the battery slot is completely adequate. Now, when it comes to what size battery you should use with this particular light, it really depends on what you're doing. If you're planning on using the clip with this particular light, I would probably recommend using a smaller size battery that's, below 4 amp hours. But as long as you have a secure mounting point, say an actual 2x4 or a properly sized pipe or tube, it should stay in place just fine even with a 4 amp hour battery. But with that being said, I would definitely not use an 8 amp hour battery or 12 amp hour battery if you are planning on using it with that spring clamp, simply because, well, you don't want to tip fate, and I highly doubt that that spring clamp is going to be able to hold on to that much weight or hold that much weight in place. So yeah. So with that being said, everything here gets a pass and we can go ahead and move on. Okay, next up we have the spring clamp itself. We talked about this a little bit already, but let's go ahead and discuss it a little bit more. The spring clamp itself is made out of plastic and has a metal tensioning spring that will allow it to clamp onto different objects. There is a rubber pad on the base of the tool as well as on the clamping part of the gray plastic. So that should hopefully keep itself in place fairly well. But I definitely would not trust this with thinner objects, especially if you're hanging it in the vertical position. If it's a super thin object, say a piece of plywood or a thin piece of wood or metal, it will probably end up sliding off if it doesn't securely lock around it. It doesn't really have any sort of an issue when it comes to thicker metal piping or tubing, and I think that's actually what it works best on. So if you're working on a roll cage or on a pipe bumper or just on pipes in your house, this should be able to clamp on fairly securely as long as you can get the clamp around it, and it will probably stay in place. It also works fairly well with 2x4s, but like I said earlier, its bread and butter really is piping, and that's what it works best at clipping onto, as long as the clip will fit around it. So with that being said, it gets a pass, but it's definitely not the best clamping system that I've seen, and it could probably use some improvement in the future, but as it stands right now, it's still completely functional. Moving on. Okay, next up we have the rotating base. The rotating base is made out of plastic and allows the light to rotate in about 280 degrees roughly. This isn't a scientific measurement, that's just me guesstimating, but it does allow you some flexibility with the placement of the light. However, I'm really not sure how necessary this feature is. It seems to me that if you just eliminated this completely and just had the flexible neck come directly out of the base of the tool, it would still be, well, pretty much the exact same sort of tool. It's an interesting idea. I just think this is an unnecessary step for this particular light. There might be some reason for this particular design, but with my other gooseneck light that doesn't have a rotating base, it pretty much works in the exact same way, and I don't really have any major complaints. It's just an interesting idea that I don't think is actually all that necessary. But with that being said, I guess I'd rather have a feature than not a feature, so it's fine. Moving on. Okay, next up we have the flexible neck, gooseneck, or flex wire, whatever you want to call it. The gooseneck on this particular tool is, well, it's fairly decent. It's nice and long, coming in around 16 inches, and it has a nice rubberized coating to protect the wire and wiring on the inside. So I don't really have any major complaints when it comes to the overall design. It doesn't always stay directly in place where you have to put the light or point the light, but it does so about 90% of the time, and I think that's an acceptable performance. Just remember that you can't be too extreme with the placement of the light. Say you can't really make a Z or something like that. You can make S shapes or C shapes, but anything more extreme than that is definitely not going to, well, stay in place. So at the end of the day, I don't really have any major complaints about the neck on this particular tool, and I think it works just fine. Moving on. Okay, next up we have the power button. Now the power button is located on the head of the light and will allow you to, well, switch between the two different modes. The first mode is going to be the high mode, which is around 400 lumens, and then the second mode will be the lower mode, which is around 200 lumens, and then you press it a third time to turn off the light. You can actually turn off the light from the high mode by simply pressing and holding the button, and then the light will turn off, but honestly it's quicker just to press the button twice, but just more information for you to know about. The button itself is a little bit on the small side, but it has a nice rubberized cover which goes over, well, the switch on the inside of the light. It's a little bit on the small side, like I said earlier, so if you're wearing super thick gloves, it might be a little bit hard to find, and sometimes when you have the light twisted at a weird angle, it's not where you think it will be. So that's just something to keep in mind. I personally would have liked to have seen the on and off switch located on the body of the tool rather than the head of the light, but that's just a personal preference and not really that big of a deal. So yeah, other than that, everything here is a, well, pass. So let's go ahead and move on. Okay, next up we have the, well, zoomable lens, which is actually kind of a cool feature and not something you typically find on a gooseneck work light. This is definitely going to be useful for if you need more area light or if you need a more focused light. And, well, quite frankly, there really is nothing wrong with this particular design. Although I personally would have liked to have seen a twist focus on this particular light, simply because in colder weather it's rather difficult to do this one-handed. When you're in a warm environment, it's fairly easy to adjust with a single hand, but in cold temperatures it becomes very stiff and you'll have to use two hands in order to adjust it, which is kind of a pain, but really not that big of a deal. But with that being said, everything here gets a pass, and I'm really glad that Ryobi did some innovation instead of taking away beloved features like they did with their drills. I'm still salty about them taking away the bit holder and magnet tray. But with that being said, let's go ahead and move on. Okay, let's go ahead and talk about this light in use and the quality of the light output. Now, the quality of the light that this light is putting out is actually very nice. It's a nice neutral white color, which isn't too warm or too cold, and there is no detectable flickering at 30 frames per second on my camera, so that means that it's not really going to cause you as much eye fatigue as other lights, which are going to be flickering at that frequency. So I'm fairly happy with the overall performance with this light's output. You can have it be fairly wide for working in a large area, or you can have it down to a pinpoint in order to, well, have it focus on something at a distance, or, well, where you just need to focus the light, say down a well or something. So that's also another nice addition. So overall, when it comes to the light output, no complaints, and it gets a pass from me. Now, the light output is being provided by a single LED bead, so that means that you are definitely going to be dealing with more shadows. But, well, you're kind of hard to put multiple LEDs in a gooseneck light without it becoming, well, super unbalanced. Which, actually, this light is super unbalanced. Because of how long that gooseneck is, and when you couple it with the fact that they use fairly nice quality materials which are heavier in nature than the lightweight materials found in my cheaper gooseneck light, which also has a shorter neck, this light falls over incredibly easy, which is probably my biggest complaint with this particular light. So unless you're using it with a 12 amp hour battery, I would highly recommend always having this light clamped to something, which is a little bit of a disappointment because, well, sometimes depending on what kind of an angle or where you're working, you can't always clip the light to something, and you don't always have a large battery to hook onto the bottom of it. And, well, yeah, that's really the biggest downside. Even 4 amp hour batteries don't provide enough weight to keep the light from falling over, and that is a little bit of a disappointment. I would have liked to have seen a little bit different approach when it comes to the materials that they used in order to construct this light to keep it from falling over. That might be what the turret was kind of meant to help keep it from doing, but it doesn't really help at all. So yeah, other than that, nothing wrong with this light, and it gets a pass from me. Moving on. Okay, without a battery, the light weighs 562 grams, which is about 1.2 pounds. And with a 4 amp hour battery, it weighs 1,281 grams, which is about 2.8 pounds. And with that being said, let's go ahead and go into the pros and cons. And the first pro would be 18 volt. 18 volt means that this will work with all your Ryobi 18 volt batteries, and you can adapt batteries over from other brands via third-party adapters. Just remember, you do that at your own risk. Focusable lens. The focusable lens is definitely a useful and an unusual feature that you won't find on very many gooseneck lights. So, quite frankly, I consider it to be a pro. Clamp. The clamp definitely makes this a far more useful gooseneck light and will help you in a variety of situations. 2 modes. Having 2 different modes means you can either have a longer runtime or a brighter work area, which is always a nice feature to have. Rotating. Yeah, the head rotates. Honestly, I don't really know why it does that. I don't really think it's actually that pro of a feature, but there might be some reason why it's on there that I just don't understand. So it's on the pros list because it's a feature, they included it, so I guess that's a good thing. But at the end of the day, I probably should have put it on the meh list. And the first meh would be the gooseneck. The gooseneck is made out of high quality materials, which is good, but it's heavy, which is bad because it makes it unstable. So at the end of the day, there's a trade-off. It's not really a pro, it's not really a con, it's just kind of meh. And the next meh would be the price. When this light is not on sale, it's overpriced, but when it goes on sale, I think it's a reasonable price, and I think it's worth picking up. You can also check Tool Direct to see if it's on sale. Sometimes when it goes on sale over there, it'll drop down to around $22 to $25 plus shipping. So just FYI. And the first and biggest con would be the balance. Overall, the balance of this light is not great. It has a tendency of tipping over unless you have it clamped to something, so I would recommend either making a little portable stand to keep it from falling over, or, well, just laying the light on its side to begin with and having it pointed at whatever you need it pointed at. So yeah, at the end of the day, this is a bit of a con, but it's nothing that is unexpected with a gooseneck light. And the next con is more of a personal preference, but I personally would have liked to have seen the switch to turn the light on and off located on the body of the tool rather than the head of the light, but that's just more of a personal preference. Moving on. And that is it for the pros and cons. Final thoughts on this particular light. Overall, I'm actually really happy with this particular light, and I don't really see any major downsides to it. Everything that's wrong with it is, well, wrong with pretty much every other gooseneck light on the market, or, well, is more of a personal preference issue. So, quite frankly, because of that zoomable lens, the amount of light this puts out, the fact that it's compatible with Ryobi batteries, and you have a clamp so you can clamp it to things, means that this is a versatile little light, and you're going to be hard-pressed to find anything of its equal on the market in the same price category. So quite frankly, this little light comes highly recommended. And that is it for this video. I've been sick for over a month now, so I'm still a little bit scatterbrained, but I am recovering, and hopefully this stupid bronchitis, cold, COVID, whatever the heck this was, it will be gone by the next video, and everything should hopefully be back to normal. So if you like this video, please like and subscribe, and we'll see you next time. God bless.